I used to play like a variant of League, so I know it's fun, but it's not like fun to the point. Look, this guy's whole thing was like, I'm this effective altruist. Now I can just send you $100K. It's going to take me 5 minutes.
So that's why when people like kidnap people's data and things along those lines, they'd like to get paid.
I have 2 employees, and both of them are overseas. Like one of them's in London, one of them's in Ukraine. And so for me, I have to pay them, and I have to do that. You put $100,000 into this little mixer, and then it sends $100,000 out later, and nobody knows where that money came from.
What is a mixer? How does it work?
It's interesting. So the most famous example is Tornado Cat. Appreciate your transparency. Kind of kissing up a little bit. But I was just like, somebody has to ask him some real questions. So I had 2 prior little Twitter space interactions with him, and he kept getting away with the fact that a lot of people found out about crypto the same time the mainstream media, everyone else did. So by the time they're actually investing,
it's too late.
It's too late. I think the most fair case you could make about the problem is when at the exact moment FTX can't pay you back is the exact moment that FTT becomes worthless. So you think you have all this collateral. Now if you're some criminal, laundering money has just never been easier. Instead of taking $100,000 across the border or wiring it where it can get held up by a bank. What he said in one of the interviews, he goes, no one believes me when I said I donated dark because no one believes anyone would be like, everyone wants the credit for donating. No one believes that I just do it on the sly. I need to go start trading with it unless, obviously we have FDIC insurance, stuff like that. But they didn't have that. They just take your money, go trade with it. And that's where the disaster started. You're like, it's this magic internet money.
Magic.
How do you get some of that? How do you get some of that magic internet money? Well, you have to go somewhere to buy it. And so it's a crypto exchange is where you kind of go. You put your fiat. He's a shark. He knows what he's doing.
What was the conflict between the 2 of them that led him to do that?
The conflict was, it's a great question. The conflict was ultimately that Sam was trying to get some regulations passed, and he broke that showed that maybe they're not as healthy as they should be. There would have been a run on the banks, and people would have found out. It's just like, when are they going to find out? He happened to be the final straw, if that makes sense.
So someone would have
not having sort of like, it's maybe not big enough. They're good people, a lot of the people going after these guys, but it's like trying to catch everyone who's speeding. You can take that money and you can send it to what's called a mixer, which is this like fancy language for a way to like anonymize your transaction. Like you put it, we don't know. I mean, there's only a few that are bigger. Like there's Binance, very opaque company. We don't exactly know.
And what has happened to Binance since FTX went?
Touch your money, obviously. That was the whole point. It's like, you deposit with us, we're not going to do anything with your money. It's your money. It's like a deposit. Like it's almost like a bank. Like you deposit with a bank. Your bank isn't supposed to go ahead and take your money. There was already all this worry in the past. That summer, there had been a bunch of companies that collapsed, and people had never thought FTX. It was kind of the first time anyone thought FTX could maybe not have the money. They're setting it up with like, I used to be broke like you. Well, that's a strategy. A lot of these guys were never broke, right? It's just part of the story you have to tell to be really effective. It's like calling that a fraud early. I have a buddy of mine. He goes by Dirty Bubble Media on Twitter. He's like one of the Anon Twitter accounts. He was calling it a fraud. You think you have this backstop because on the books it's worth, X dollars. Let's say it's like worth $5 a coin. But what you're not realizing is the real risk is when FTX can't pay you back, they probably can't pay anyone back.
Crypto.
Ransomware. Yes. Yeah. Yes. 100%. Because before it was like, okay, you need to use like Western Union or sort of one of these places where you can kind of send money without too much screw. The son of Harvard lawyers, we just sort of can't lose. And nobody paid attention to some of the red flags that were going on until ultimately it was too late. It turns out he was pilled at the end when you're like ready for this thing to go down. Because I know as soon as I get on, it's going to end pretty quickly after. I said, let me on. Let me ask him some real hard questions. Because all these guys are like, Sam, there's some of these people making hundreds of millions of dollars. People are miserable at the end of it. And nothing happens. And that was the start of my show.
So you start just doing interview
FTT tokens and pay everybody out.
Oh, that's what he thought? He's on amphetamines, right? So he can't be thinking totally clearly.
Okay, so this is funny. They found his League of Legends account, and during some of the calls after it was a fraud, you could hear him clicking in the background. Click, click, playing League, lateral like dollars or like some asset will give you FTT tokens, which is their own invented coin, and that should have value if anything goes wrong. And people were accepting that as value, but it means playing League of Legends while on investment calls. Like, at the time, that was seen as this charming, like, genius thing.
On calls.
You could hear, even actually, okay, I used to be just like you, Joe, but then, I found out that doing Amazon drop shipping is the way to make millions of dollars. And, I used to fail, but by these little tricks,
Analogy for losing your house?
It's funny. Yeah.
I mean, good Lord.
The idea of these mixers was you'd anonymize your transactions. So, like, let's say
regulators, when he was trying to impose regulations or encourage regulations, how could that have benefited him as opposed to Binance? Like, what could they have possibly done to make it easy?
Ethereum, what are we tracking here? And then it goes to some mixer somewhere, and then we don't know where it goes after that.
So when Sam Bankman-Fried was working with regulators, is it just pure addiction? I think, those multiplayer games, those, online role-playing games, that's what that is, right? It's like
I think it's is it a MOBA? Actually, campaign finance laws, I've heard, are pretty weak. I forget the name of the law, but it was passed in like the early 2000s, 2010s maybe, where it actually became very easy to donate around, right? Kevin O'Leary's in. So you kind of think you're swimming safely with like other savvy investors. And that's what ultimately gets you to buy in. Bernie Madoff is very similar. God mode on Ultimate Bet, where the CEO could see everybody's hands and play on the site, seeing everybody's hands. So he just
go back to making money again.
I don't think he thought he would repay everyone, but everyone thought like, oh, we'll just enter Chapter 11 bankruptcy. We'll restructure the company. We'll reopen. We'll just turn all the debt into new act that bill. And now that it was all a fraud, or the guy who basically pushed it was a fraud, now they're like trying to retool it. Where's the money? I don't know. But he controls everything. And so it's like this is the tactic of these offshore companies is like you put they're like, hey, don't work a 9-to-5 job, like be free like me. And I'm like, you're here on a Sunday at like 5 p.m. How free are you really? Like you're just reputable people like BlackRock, Sequoia Capital, they all invest in this guy. Kevin O'Leary famously promoted it for like $18 million.
They gave him $18 million to promote it?
He says, found out how to be successful. And if you invest with me, I'll save you time. You could do it yourself, Joe. You could do it. But it's going to take you 5 years. Get with me, and I'm going to shortcut your success. Launches FTX in 2019. And that's a crypto platform where, honestly, you can make a lot more money than just with a trading firm. So FTX quickly skyrockets in popularity. Don't invest. Like, that's a bad idea.
People were calling bullshit, though. Just like they were calling, there was a few people that were wary that were calling bullshit on Bernie Madoff, and there was a few
assets. You can check yourself. Like, I have $1 billion in USDC. Well, that's great, but it doesn't matter if I have $1 billion in crypto, Bitcoin, whatever. If I owe $2 billion,
right?
That might be one of the first like trillionaires or whatever. Like he's such a great entrepreneur. They think he's such a genius. It might have been one of the A1Z guys. Or we're just going to do a few transactions through your name. That just came out in a press release. It's the new charges. He was basically like they call them straw donors because it's like if I give money to you to give, really perpetuated their fraud. I can break it down. How much do you know about the FTX?
Let's
situation?
Break it down for people that don't know about it. So
let's do it. So FTX was this crypto exchange.
It was like 70,000 or something like
60 plus. Yeah.
So that's the lure. The lure is you buy in for pennies, and one day you're insanely rich. I'm sure you know about that. I don't really understand what's going. Like the FTX thing, for example, is the best one because I was so in the dark about this thing. I was like, what is happening? Like, what are they doing? Try to break it down for us. Like, first of all,
so he decides to donate dark to a Republican, like to Republicans. And part of the accusation is he knowingly did this through one of his...
and probably overly confident.
Yeah, it's pretty clear he didn't see like the full scope of the situation, especially at first. It seemed like he thought, he was like saying FTX US was a middleman because there's no one who controls like Bitcoin, like no one can say like no to a transaction. Now it's like there's nothing to stop you from sending that money, and then you're not actually like this incredible business that you thought it was, that you're going to get rich easily. So don't do that. Go do crypto. You got to get into crypto now. And then it became NFT because every day it's getting less valuable. So the question is, what do you do if you're in that country making money? If you want to see on Twitter, I probably butchered his name, but he was actually originally sort of an ally of Sam. So he invested in FTX early on, put $100 million in. And so before, it's like if I send you $1 and then you send that dollar on, we can easily trace that back to me, right? It's like here, here. But if I send $1 to you and everyone's sending you $1, and then you're sending $1 to everything, I don't have access to the book. Like I basically knew nothing. So anytime you'd call him out on an issue, you'd say, "Where's the money?" He goes, "Well, I don't know. It's gone. It's Alameda Research. Ask Alameda." Fact that this guy, he got away with lying so long and perpetuating this image of himself as this generous billionaire. You know, he's sort of the next Warren Buffett. That when everything goes wrong, but even Western Union has been they've been getting kind of pinched a little bit. Like, hey, you guys got to stop allowing all of this. But in crypto, because there's no put like one. Let's say I have Ethereum, one Ether into this mixer, right? This pool of money. A bunch of people are putting one Ethereum into lack of regulation and the ability to send peer-to-peer, which means like you and I can just send money to each other directly, no middleman. There's also a really huge opportunity for fraud, scams, some reactions, but not much. What I noticed is it resonated with people beyond the views, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Like I was just like, there was something different about the reaction to it. Like, and you know, Vic do these trades that are profitable in crypto. So the way he first made his money was he did something where he bought Bitcoin in the U.S. and then he sold it on these Japanese money. Like, well, how can you view this as a battle? Like, but he viewed it as like we're sparring partners. Like, and you won this round or you won the war.
Because he thinks this is going to go on forever.
What I know is everyone's always interested in pulling up the ladder after them and like building the kind of the rule book around like, hey, like if you're from this certain jurisdiction that we're a part of, you're fine. If you're not, like, you know, caught. In my view, what he did was criminal. That's why I started. But it hasn't been prosecuted or anything like that. But he's on a leaked private call. Everyone can go listen to it yourself. It's just this. I'm a millionaire by the time I'm 23 years old. Just buy my course. My course is, you know, $2,000. Pay me $2,000. I'll teach you to get rich quick.
So initially, he thought he was going to be able to figure out a way to pull all the company's assets together and
I think
make everybody sound and repay everyone. And
really taking that. I mean, maybe some of them were taking it seriously, but not enough.
So if FTX didn't encourage regulation and CZ didn't get upset at that, what is it's a crypto exchange, right? So how does that work?
So the first question is when you learn about crypto, you know, make something work. If it's going to go to the public, you have to solve all these issues. And unfortunately, we saw crypto kind of go mainstream before they had. You withdraw, there's nothing tying your Ethereum to your particular address to like this random external address because you send it to a different one. Executives Ryan Salami or something. I think that's his last name. Salami. I don't know. I just don't know how to pronounce it. But he was like, the number 3 donor to the Republican Party. But it was all orchestrated through Sam, person in the space, to where people thought, okay, well, if he's saying it, you know, he's a guy who only says positive things about crypto because he's a crypto executive. So if he's saying there might be problems, there's probably some problems. But yeah, tokens like is the individual. You can think of currency, right? So it's like the individual. So Bitcoin is, you have Bitcoin. Then you have, it's one of the cryptocurrencies. You have Ethereum. I'm this guy who's going to maximize good in the world. You know, and that was his reason for working all the time. I mean, that's the justification to be hopped up on amphetamines. It's like maximize productivity, maximize human happiness. They're like, look, I've been screwed by the banks. Every time the government's printing a bunch of money, where do I go? Right? You can understand the appeal, but it's just like you went on sticks or something. Like it was never, the problem was the foundation was wrong from the beginning. If you don't have enough deposits to cover withdrawals, you just don't have the money, right? It's this guy who drives a Toyota. So you go like, well, why does he need to scam me if he's driving a Toyota, right? Then it's like, which Sam Bankman-Fried did. Then it's like, okay, I start hearing about these tokens. And they're like, hey, selling courses, like, it's always the new grift. You always have to find, because people figure it out. Like, they go like, oh, that actually doesn't work. Like, hey, drop shipping is, and basically like, shell games where you're hiding the money.
Yeah.
You're saying, oh, invest in this. This is going to become valuable later. But you actually own a bunch of reasons that our banks have a bunch of anti-money laundering laws. There's a reason that they have all sorts of finance laws. It's not for their safety. It's for your safety. I mean, it's like they need to. That's the issue. Was FTX's problem was not CZ. Ultimately, he's kind of the guy who like pushed over the House. I hate doctors so much, and it always seems to like end up with a sales pitch. Like it never was like, hey, let me just give you this free thing. It was like always like there's a catch. Mm-hmm. So I didn't basically screaming about all these scammers online, and unlike my previous work, which kind of had resonated, like it had gotten this Coinbase. It seems like they are legitimate, but so much of the problem with crypto is we don't know how much of this stuff is money laundering. We don't know how much of this stuff is like the account fiat at FTX. And so what prosecutors are now arguing is he knew, of course, what it was. He deliberately obscured. You believe, it's kind of too good to be true, but the social proof is overwhelming, and it overwhelms your kind of like alarm bells. So the social proof is a combination of things. So first of all, it's like Tom Brady backs him. Well, Tom Brady's got to have some guys who are looking into this. And then it's like, well, BlackRock backed him. Well, BlackRock definitely has some guys who looked into it. Right. It's Sequoia Capital. They said he was then he comes up, prep school. He's kind of like built for success, right? He goes to MIT, goes to Jane Street as this quantitative trader. Your issue is that anytime there's demand for withdrawals, you're going to encounter problems. So it was going to be inevitable anytime any store said, well, hey, can we restructure all this money that went through me like a loan so that we can, say that I took a loan out and I was donating so we didn't violate any laws. They never ended up doing that stuff. You're just having to trust these shady offshore entities that they're telling the truth. Binance says they're fine. They show proof of reserves, but what are their liabilities? But like, it was very clear the internal conversations were they knew they were committing fraud. They knew they were doing things wrong. And this idea was, well, no one's going to catch us, right? Nobody's what that was to hide it from people who were trying to take a look at his books. But it's just, that's what I mean by black box. You never know what games these guys are playing. Like they say, oh, here's sort of like the rough estimate of our balance. And I'd go because it was like my friends like said, hey, we have to get somebody, you want to go? And I was like, sure, I'll go. I was like kind of fascinated. And you'd see these guys in the terms of service. They said results may vary. What's that about? Mm-hmm. I mean, ultimately, it's like, and so I realized like, oh, there's this sophisticated way that they're preying on my psychology. And the victims would reach out to me. They'd be like, hey, I'd been scammed by this guy, and I didn't realize what was going on. And you showed me, sort of like how the whole scheme worked. Like nobody knew what was going on behind the scenes. So even though they said, like, we're not going to touch your money, as soon as you deposited Bitcoin, I mean, I talked to some of the insiders at Alameda. They said they had this back door, and then he goes into the crypto space, and he launches FTX.
He's very young, right? How old is he?
I think he is young. I'm not. Maybe you can look that up, Jamie. 31.
Did you interview him before the scandal?
No, not before the scandal.
So it's like as it was going down.
As it was going down, he goes on all these Twitter spaces. He doesn't want to. He's doing interviews with them. He'd be afraid of being indicted, or I don't really understand why he can't go, but he can't go to America. So Sam was meeting with regulators. CZ felt cut out, like he was basically going to get a bad deal when this stuff went down. And a report comes out from CoinDesk where it shows FTX's balance sheet. It shows actually what tokens they have. For one of the first times, it was kind of crypto keys all the time. I mean, it's kind of an interesting idea where you go, I'm going to get in before everyone else. But a lot like investment funds, they invested in a bunch of NFT projects. Mark Andreessen, I think, is the guy who runs it. There's wire transfer, and it's kind of expensive to do these. Like, you pay all these fees for wire transfers. So the idea is like, okay, well, if you have crypto, those wire fees can go down. And instead of taking, maybe a day or something, it'll take like And it's like, well, what's fungibility mean? It means whether you were a guy withdrawing who is this degenerate day trader, there's no Ethereum left, there's no Bitcoin left, you don't have the real tokens anymore, you just have your sort of nonsense FTT tokens, the tokens you invented. And he said, oh, his whole thing was he did this thing with Ultimate Bet. So he was one of the lawyers. So there's this poker site called Ultimate Bet. And he got caught in this scandal where they had enabled this thing called I too am safe because Tom Brady's got his money there. So I can put my money there.
Is the lure is like how Bitcoin used to be worth very little, and then one time it was with the high of Bitcoin.
Sam wanted to basically influence politics by just donating. And the idea is you donate to both sides, you can never lose, right?
Yeah.
If you have your abilities, it's hard to know. So people really just take you at face value, and they have to trust that, like, oh, other people are invested, so I guess I'll jump in too.
And that's one guy who lost a hard drive and who's paying people to go through a landfill to try to find his hard drive because there's billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin on that hard drive.
Yeah, people lose their. This is what was going on in crypto. They're called collateralized loans. But what FTX was doing was they were saying, hey, like, we'll take $1 million from you, but instead of giving you collateral, so like
that.
The famous example is like Coinbase is in America, and they have to file all these forms. They're a regulated entity. They're a publicly traded.
Gotten away with it.
So many of these scams are like these issues of either regulators not having time, not having the resources, or you were a grandma who just put one Bitcoin on there, or more likely the grandson. He treated all the accounts the same. So when everyone came running for the money, they just withdrew until nothing was. Why not? Like, there were just no adults in that room, and like the few adults that there were like, they had like a criminal lawyer. Well, anyway, I don't think he's actually been convicted of anything. I shouldn't say that. They had this guy Dan Free
do something like that. Like, why would he publicly communicate?
This is one of the. This is why it's so interesting to me to look at fraud. Like, this is why it fascinates me, as well as I think it's an important thing. LGBTQ plus causes. And it was through a guy, and the guy was like, I feel a little uncomfortable with this. And they said, well, we don't have anyone trustworthy at FTX we can donate through. And that video has aged so well because it's like, people are like, oh, it was all true. But people were outright calling it a fraud. Like Mark Cohodes, he's a famous short seller. He was TT. So it looks like, if you just look at their assets, it looks like they're covering their liabilities. They owe customers $10 billion. Looks like they have $10 billion, but like on your dollars or whatever, euros or whatever, and you put it into this crypto exchange. They have a bank, and they work with that bank. Then they exchange, or with just put a bunch of garlic cloves in the pot. I still remember our house like reeked. She would put 60 cloves of garlic in a stew. Never understood how Bernie Madoff got people because it seems so preposterous. And then I fell for something very similar. And what I noticed with all of these things, the thread is very treatable kind of cancer, and she's fine. But at the time I watched her as she's like, gets this diagnosis, gets swept up with all these hucksters who are telling her that the way to treat thyroid cancer, offering FTX, the customer deposits, and was using it in Alameda Research, which was his trading firm, to try to make extra money, and he lost it.
And so this is all because it's
right? It's all at some address. And so people were asking, like, you say you have all this Bitcoin, where's the Bitcoin? You say you have all this Ethereum, where's the Ethereum? And he launches Alameda Research first, which is just like this trading firm, which basically the idea here is we have some ideas, we're going to raise a little bit of money, and we're going to do.
I watched the new CEO, talk about it.
Yeah.
About him trying
That's John Ray.
Yeah. Trying to unravel it. And it's amazing.
This big mess right now, and we're waiting for regulators to figure it out. Finally, regulators have stepped on the scene, but, right now it's just this kind of wild, wild west regulation for, I guess, offshore crypto exchanges, right?
And so these campaign finance... These violations.
A Matt Levine interview with Sam Bankman-Fried. He didn't call him a fraud outright, but he's like, hey, it seems like you're in the Ponzi business, and business is good.
Whoa. And what did he say to that?
of that token, then you sell it off, and then the price plummets. So you thought you had a bunch of money, but actually it's worth nothing. Like there's all these new scams that have emerged as a result of people getting interested in this idea of an alternative. I mean, so it's like things are good for now. Yeah.
You don't know.
That was the problem with the FTX. Like they had hidden all their numbers. Like that Sam had, which thankfully she did, and she's fine now. She takes medication to replace the hormones her thyroid would generate. But I saw my mom kind of get swept in this thing that I knew was nonsense. But actually, his whole technique of shifting the blame like onto Alameda and like I don't control Alameda. I've seen something very similar. I'm investigating this Ponzi scheme that's offshore. Well, you know, there were some margin trading accounts, and I'm like, no, but there were people who didn't trade with margin. There were people who just put their money with you. And all they wanted, you have Dogecoin, you have SafeMoon, you have FTT, which is what FTX was using as their native token. So a lot of these guys, you'll start a crypto exchange of ads, like get-rich-quick schemes. Like you've got a bunch of people, you know, flexing in their Lamborghinis, telling you, you know, they're like 25 years old, telling you want to get rich by 25 or 22. I'll show you. I made $1 million and give you this yield. He starts explaining like this thing that sounds exactly like a Ponzi scheme. And so ultimately, Matt Levine's like, yeah, this doesn't really make a lot of sense. But again, it stops short. Hey, just make this problem go away. This is the CEO. Like, go blame it on somebody else. Go blame it on some, like, you know, third party that got access to our website. Say it was like a glitch or something. And so that or, you know, something like Europe or something like that is you are subject to all these regulations which require you to be a little more careful.
Oh, those are pesky.
Yeah, they're in everybody. I ask him, and he doesn't want to talk to me. So, but he's going on these Twitter Spaces. So I was tracking when he'd go on a Twitter Space, and I would contact the people ahead of time and said, "Hey, so if you default on that loan, I'm out $1 million." Another way is I ask for, okay, I'll take some equity in the studio if something goes wrong, right? So I cover my butt if you default on it. Now, that these basically nerds in cryptography thought of, which is it's brilliant. I mean, it is brilliant because it is basically it's almost impossible to trace. He blamed all the wrongdoing of FTX on Alameda Research, and he said, "I don't control Alameda Research," even though he was the owner. He's no longer. There was a lot of fear of missing out or FOMO in the markets at the time. You know, everyone thought, "Oh, cryptos, you have to get in now." Right? Because if you get in now, all these other wallets, that it's impossible to know which of those new wallets my dollar's from. It's like, it's just crazy. It's a crazy idea. I just wasn't interested. I was like, that's not my life. So I always wanted to sort of, you know, have a voice. And so I started a YouTube channel just doing random videos.
Easier or more profitable for him.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why would he do that?
I'm not as familiar with the regulation side of things. People were talking about that a lot. Is the experience of the lawyer that FTX then hires is like being complicit on a private call, leaked private call, trying to cover up this God mode scam is not surgery. You can just treat it naturally. Just don't worry about, hey, don't listen to the doctors. Don't listen to your general practitioner. You can just treat it with like colloidal silver. That is his background. And so I asked, you know, Sam, I was like, you know, what does it say if this is your chief regulatory officer? This guy was they wanted to store some Bitcoin with Tom Brady. They wanted to be alongside Tom Brady. So he's like, well, you know, there was fungibility between wallets.
Figured it out, and someone would have started dumping their coin.
Yeah, people already, I mean, even leading up, like CZ gets a lot of the credit for it, but like already, like a day before, was going to undo sort of everything. Like if you don't root out the scams, you don't find ways to solve that, this is never going to work. Because if you're located out in the Bahamas, which is a great place to put your...
Why do they do it in the Bahamas?
Because it's unregulated. So the problem with doing stuff in the United States, after the fact, he's like, he's still playing video games, and you're like, can you have the decency to get off the video game and talk to people?
So bizarre. It's just so bizarre.
Left. And ultimately, because they had lost billions of dollars, it left billions of dollars in credit claims, basically. They didn't have the money.